What you just saw is the same country, same land, same government, same people. Malaysia is littered with the concrete skeletons of projects that promised the world and delivered nothing. Billions of ringgit, millions of square feet, decades of time, swallowed whole by political ego, governance failure, and a dangerous obsession with looking rich rather than becoming rich. From a high-speed rail that never ran its full route, to entire cities built for millions of people that stand completely empty today, these ruins aren't just failures. They are receipts. But here's the question nobody is asking. What if Malaysia needed to fail this spectacularly to finally build something real? Because right now, something is shifting. Something quiet, industrial, and borderline unstoppable. And by 2030, Malaysia might prove that its greatest failures were actually the foundation of its most important comeback. Let's pull back the curtain. Let me take you on a tour. Not of Malaysia's highlights reel, but of its graveyard. Somewhere outside Kuala Lumpur right now, there is a skyscraper standing half-built. The crane stopped. The workers left. The investors went quiet. And the building just stands there. A monument to ambition without accountability. And it's not alone. Forest City, a $100 billion artificial island development off Johor, designed for 700,000 residents. Day, ghost town. Vacancy rates so catastrophic that units originally sold for hundreds of thousands of ringgit are being relisted at a fraction of the price. The Kuala Lumpur-Singapore high-speed rail, a project that would have connected two of Southeast Asia's most important cities in 90 minutes. Cancelled, revived, renegotiated, suspended again, $1 billion spent on a railway that has never carried a single passenger. The Bandar Malaysia mega development in the heart of KL, designed to be a world-class transit hub and smart city precinct. Cancelled in 2017. Revived in 2019. Stalled again. At the time of this video, still unresolved. So what went wrong? Was it bad luck? Was it economics? Was it incompetence? The honest answer is all three. But there's one ingredient that runs through every single failure on this list. And it's the ingredient that nobody in power ever wants to talk about. Political ego. Here's how the cycle works. A new government comes in, or a new minister takes office, and they want a legacy project. Something that will put their name on the skyline. Something that says, I was here and I built something great. So they commission a feasibility study. The study comes back cautiously optimistic with 17 major caveats. The caveats get ignored. The ribbon-cutting ceremony gets planned. The contracts get awarded, sometimes without open tender. And the project launches with fanfare and a CGI video that looks like something out of a science fiction film. And then reality shows up. The land acquisition disputes. The design changes mid-build. The contractor going insolvent. The political handover that kills momentum. The currency fluctuation that blows the budget. The demand projections that were, at best, wildly optimistic and at worst, deliberately falsified. And suddenly, what was supposed to be a world-class landmark becomes a billion-dollar liability. But here's what really burns. Malaysia didn't just lose money on these projects. It lost something harder to recover, credibility. Because every foreign investor who looked at Forest City or watched the HSR saga unfold asked the same question. Can Malaysia actually finish what it starts? Now let's talk about what these failures actually cost. Because this isn't just about embarrassment. This is about math. Malaysia's federal debt has hovered dangerously close to, and at points exceeded, its self-imposed 60% of GDP ceiling. Now, not all of that is from failed mega projects, but a significant portion traces directly back to government-linked companies that borrowed heavily to fund these vanity landmarks, and then couldn't service the debt when the projects imploded. You want a number? 1 MDB. The One Malaysia Development Berhad scandal, where an estimated $4.5 billion US dollars was misappropriated from a state investment fund, is the most extreme, most criminal version of a pattern that ran through Malaysian infrastructure development for decades. Ambitious project, political connections, minimal oversight, catastrophic outcome. And while 1MDB was exceptional in its brazenness, the underlying disease, governance friction, accountability gaps, and the prioritization of optics over outcomes infected project after project across the country. So here's the question that Malaysia's policymakers had to eventually face. If we keep building things that don't work for people who didn't ask for them, using money we don't really have, where does that road end? It ends with a country that looks impressive from the highway, but is quietly hollowing out from within. And I think some people in Putrajaya finally started to understand that, because around 2020, 2021, something started to change. From vanity landmarks to industrial revolution. What if I told you that while the world was busy talking about Malaysia's failures, Malaysia quietly became the 7th largest exporter of semiconductors on the planet? Not 7th in Southeast Asia, 7th in the world, ahead of countries that most people would assume are decades more advanced. And that's not an accident. That's a pivot, a deliberate, strategic, sometimes painful pivot away from landmark buildings and tourism theatrics towards something with real economic weight. Enter the new Industrial Master Plan 2030, Malaysia's most serious attempt in a generation to reorient its entire economic architecture around high-value manufacturing, advanced technology, and green industry. The plan has 5 core pillars. First, semiconductor and electronics deepening. Malaysia has been assembling chips for decades, but mostly the lower-margin back-end work. The 2030 plan pushes upstream into chip design, advanced packaging, and eventually fabrication. This is where the real money is. Second, electric vehicle ecosystem development. Malaysia has quietly positioned itself as a serious EV manufacturing hub. Proton's partnership with Geely, Perodoua's electrification roadmap, international EV brands setting up regional assembly in Selangor. The infrastructure is being built now. Third, data center and digital infrastructure. Malaysia is experiencing a data center boom that most analysts didn't see coming. Microsoft, Google, AWS, all committing billions to Malaysian data center campuses. Why Malaysia? Land availability, competitive energy costs, political stability relative to regional peers, fiber connectivity. It checks every box. Fourth, aerospace and advanced manufacturing. The Subang and Senai aerospace corridors are expanding. Malaysia is building MRO capacity. That's maintenance, repair, and overhaul that positions it as Southeast Asia's aviation services backbone. Fifth, green and circular economy transition. Solar panel manufacturing, battery recycling, halal green certified supply chains. Malaysia is trying to get ahead of the global ESG wave rather than scrambling to catch up. Now, is this plan perfect? Is Malaysia executing it flawlessly? Absolutely not. There are still bureaucratic bottlenecks. There are still land approval delays. There are still concerns about whether the talent pipeline can keep up with the ambition. But here's the critical difference between this industrial push and the Vanity projects that came before it. This one has customers, real customers, multinational corporations writing real checks, not CGI renders and government projections. Actual foreign direct investment flowing in at record rates. In 2023, Malaysia approved over £329 billion in investments, a historic high. The year before that was also a record. And the year before that. Something real is happening. But I want to be fair here, because optimism without honesty is just marketing. Malaysia still has unresolved structural challenges that could derail the 2030 ambitions if they're not addressed head-on. The education pipeline needs urgent modernization. You cannot build a semiconductor design industry without semiconductor design engineers. And right now, the gap between what Malaysian universities are producing and what the industry actually needs is measurable and growing. The governance question hasn't fully been answered. Malaysia's political landscape remains fragmented. Coalition governments are inherently unstable, and policy continuity is not guaranteed. The HSR saga proved that a single change of government can derail years of negotiations overnight. Foreign investors have long memories. And then there's the corruption residue. One MDB may be behind them legally, but the reputational damage takes a generation to fully heal. Every time a procurement scandal surfaces, and they still do, it chips away at the narrative of a reformed, trustworthy Malaysia. So here's where I genuinely land on this. Malaysia is not a finished story. It's not a triumphant comeback yet, but it's also not a cautionary tale about inevitable decline. It is a country at a genuine inflection point, and the decisions made in the next 3 to 5 years on education reform, political stability, talent retention, and industrial execution will determine whether the 2030 vision becomes Malaysia's proudest chapter or just another glossy plan gathering dust next to the Forest City brochures. Malaysia's failed projects were expensive. Some were corrupt. Some were delusional. Some were simply ahead of their time, or in the wrong hands, or undone by politics that had nothing to do with economics. But every single one of them taught Malaysia something about what happens when you build for ego instead of utility, about what happens when governance is an afterthought, about the cost of opacity in a world that rewards transparency. And now, quietly, industrially, with less fanfare than a ribbon cutting, but far more substance, Malaysia is applying those lessons. The concrete skeletons are still standing. They probably will for years. And in a strange way, I think that's appropriate. Because a country that forgets its failures is a country that repeats them. Malaysia hasn't forgotten. The question is whether it has truly changed. What do you think? Is Malaysia on the right track to 2030? Or are these new industrial plans just the next generation of beautiful promises? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your perspective, especially if you're Malaysian. If this gave you a more honest picture of one of Southeast Asia's most complex and fascinating countries, share it. Subscribe for more videos that go deeper than the highlights reel. See you in the next one.